Call to order the Assembly Budget Finance Committee, Committee of the Whole. It is 12:12. We ran a little late on the committee meeting before, but we'll go through this as quickly as we can. Introductions, Mr. Rivera.
Felix Rivera. Forrest Dunbar.
Ms. Quinn.
Yes.
Yes. Eric Crow.
Lance Wilbur. Alex Slivka.
Pete Peterson.
And Mr. Dyson was here, and I think we'll be right back. And Ms. LaFrance was here and may be back. We've got to schedule a number of things and started late. Can we start with you, Mr. Wilbur?
That'd be great, Mr. Chairman. So item 3A, the impact on the earthquake to our 18 and our 19 budgets. As you remember, the Assembly set up an account and the departments, a separate account from their 2018 budget. It was $19 million for general government. As of last Friday, departments had moved roughly, I think about $500,000 worth of 2018 expenses in. Most of it had to do with operating. I have not seen the capital expenses move into that account yet. I expect to see those from PM&E, maintenance and operations, and obviously solid waste services. So we have sent out a message to the departments, to the directors, and to the budget coordinators that it's encourage them to, any expenses they have in 2018, they need to move them into this fund because, as Mr. Slivka will share with you shortly, the 2018 year-end close is going rapidly. They're doing a very good job moving those month-end close. So before they get to that point, we've asked the departments to move those expenses over. That's
operating as opposed to a capital assessment of here's our earthquake damage. This is costs in our operating side from the earthquake.
Correct.
And are they reimbursable from the state or feds?
Yes.
100%, 50%?
75-25 Fed, state.
100 to us, but they split it up.
Correct. So,
and give me the overall numbers again. We think there's about, as of now, that you've identified. Did you say 500,000 of operating?
Of operating, and I know they still have money. I know they still have expenses to move from 18 into 19.
And then the capital was just a moving target as we assess.
Right, and those will get transferred.
What do we know about capital damage from the earthquake now?
Well, we know that the building out at solid waste out at the regional landfill, that one is a significant damage, may have to be replaced. And then obviously that's on the solid waste side. General government, we have some roads that we know and we've fixed. But talking to the directors, as spring comes along, we're going to actually see some other things, and those things will begin to add up. So on
we have been joined by Mr. Dyson and Ms. LaFrance, as I predicted. Conclude your report.
So as we move into 2019 and those departments find expenses that are related to their earthquake, document those, they too will then continue to track those expenses inside that fund, which will be separate. We can track and report separately than we can for the 2019 operating budget. So, and we had a meeting, we had a presentation with the directors last Wednesday from some folks from the state that were sharing with us some of the needs that we would require for documentation, and then obviously provided us some contact information, so we'll be doing both of those things. So,
and succinctly, what's the nature in general of the 500,000? Is it overtime for people who are inspecting buildings? Is it a lot of that?
Yes. I think the bulk of it was from police, fire, the inspectors, and then we had some scatters from departments that had other expenses.
Questions for Mr. Wilbur?
I have a question.
Yeah, Mr. Dunbar.
We had talked about this, making sure it's not anywhere else. We had a meeting, a work session with the assessor, and I think a lot of us believe that the assessor's office is going to have orders of magnitude more work this year than last year because of the earthquake. Are you planning to increase staffing and track those costs, use perhaps emergency funds that we passed, so that we can hopefully get reimbursed for those costs as well?
So a couple things as it relates to the earthquake, that being one. As we move into the first quarter, we have heard from the assessors that they have a lot of work similar to the inspectors. And so whether or not we make adjustments for those before first quarter, but we will certainly be addressing whether or not the need and the amount for that in the first quarter revisions.
So I would, can I follow up?
Yeah.
I would say that the sentiment on this body, certainly Mr. Dyson and Mr. Constant expressed it as well, is we think that the assessor, at least coming into that work session, was underestimating the amount of work he's likely to face and the amount of staffing that they were preparing for. And perhaps they've come back to you with some revised estimate, but I would say that I think certainly myself, and I'm sure Mr. Dyson and probably some others too, we are willing to try to foot that bill, if it comes down to it, move money around to make sure that that assessment process goes smoothly. So we think you're going to get thousands more people that are coming asking for a reassessment.
So,
Yeah, I have a wager with the mayor that it's going to triple over 1,000. We had about 357 last time, and so we'll see how that bet turns out. So to win that bet, I use every opportunity to tell people you have 30 days, kind of starting now, to file your appeal. Go file your appeal. Mr. Dyson.
Mr. Dunbar raised a good point our last
He
meeting.
does that every once in a while.
That was, are you guys counting on the possibility of being reimbursed from federal money?
Oh, you mean for the assessment part, the increase in appeals and things? Or general?
In general,
Okay.
for our response for this earthquake?
So I can
Yeah.
answer that. Two questions. One, in general, we are expecting reimbursement. I would use this opportunity to remind people that that is keyed off of President Trump's actions. So if anybody wants to call the White House and tell him to sign the emergency order, they should do that because it's sitting on his desk. So that's the first part. The second part goes to what Mr. Dunbar said. We are going to ask for reimbursement relative to this assessment challenge, and yes, to answer the question, we are planning to staff up, and in response, we had been talking about it, but we are issuing a letter to everybody that got a yellow card and a red card, specifically reminding them of the appeal
Of the
process.
30-day period?
Yes.
Awesome. Good.
We cannot change the appeal process; it's state code. But the office, the assessor's office, has shown themselves to be very flexible in terms of dealing with these issues in a very timely manner. That their workload increases, the information that we received from the state last week indicates that if your workload goes up because of an emergency event, not necessarily going to be reimbursed by FEMA. We can ask for it. It's not a given that they'll give it to us.
Yeah,
I just want to suggest that if it was $500,000 we spent in extra expenditures, all the police and fire and all of the management, that this municipal staff should be commended because really that's a low number relative to the damage, relative to the emergency situation. And so I, for one, am glad to hear that. And I would expect it to raise. It seems low to me.
I do too. I mean, that was as of last week. They're still moving their money from expenses. So,
When's the deadline for us to get that information to the state?
So the state did the preliminary assessment, and the state is now waiting for the president to sign the order. And then once that happens, then we start the whole explicit process of exactly what we're going to get reimbursed for. So,
Can we move on, Mr.
yes,
Wilbur?
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Slivka, can we deal with the status of the 2017 CAFR first, and then we'll get to your financial status report?
sure. So at the audit meeting yesterday, the auditor, BDO, delivered their report. They expect to deliver their opinion on Monday the 21st. It has been very much delayed, but they did confirm it would be an unqualified opinion, meaning we didn't do anything wrong. They did note a number of observations of things we could have improved on. Most of these were timing related. One of those was obviously our implementation of SAP, which
They
could
noted
be
you were
better.
late?
They noted being late isn't not necessarily one of the things that they would dock you for, but we had many challenges. We are addressing them. As Mr. Wilbur said, we are moving very quickly to make sure that this does not happen this year. We are already done with the third quarter of 2018. We expect to be done with the whole year by the first week of February. So we should be back on track, and we have specifically focused everyone's efforts to make sure we deliver the CAFR by July 1.
The
which is
2018 now CAFR. will be on
correct,
time.
which is the due date required by the ML&P purchase agreement.
And I talked with Ms. LaFrance, the chair of the audit committee, briefly before this, And she had an audit committee meeting where some of those questions were answered and got through part of the presentation on it. But do you plan on holding more meetings on the capital?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that would largely depend on if the body has any further questions that, or the committee would like to reconvene. After talking further with Mr. Chadwick, I understand that the level of discussion that we had yesterday about the CAFR draft was typical for previous years for the final version of the CAFR, and that since the numbers that were presented in the draft are materially correct, it's not expected that there will be any material changes in the final draft. So again, it would depend on after members of the body have a chance to review those documents from yesterday's audit committee meeting, and if there are any further points of discussion.
Good. We don't have a meeting if we don't need it, but we do want to have it if we do. You had a number of questions. Are you thinking a whole committee meeting is needed, or you want to look at it some more, or you were satisfied? Why don't you think about it, and other members can as well, and you can communicate with the chair if you think that's necessary.
My wife does that.
Good. Then to the financial status. How's the financial status of the municipality?
I would ask the treasurer, Mr. Moore, to come forward. I think he can provide you an update for what we believe 2018 is going to look like from a revenue standpoint.
Okay, sure. So on the revenues, your Tuesday night meeting, you should have gotten an AIM that showed what the status was for revenues. And that was a projection that we made around mid-December. Since then, we've continually tried to update, and really the biggest news was how did the investment earnings do in the month of December, and it's good news. So because the stock market was terribly hit, that means the fixed income market often is sort of gets the better side of that. So as a result of that, the investment earnings, which are still missing budget, but they improved by over $700,000. So in total for general government on the revenue side, our projection with very good information now that we have 12 months of data is we should be somewhere around $400,000 under budget overall for all general government revenues. And that's
Under budget, you mean we have more revenues?
we missed our revenue budget by just $400,000
Under.
And so that's very good news. That is extremely tight to budget, and we're glad we haven't seen any big negative surprises. There is one or two adjustments that the controller division will do in February, March, and those are kind of final year-end accrual and true-up entries. Those can cause things to swing, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes even $1 million or more. We just can't project that. That's something controller does to close out the year. But for everything that we know about in sort of normal data, it's very good news. Also, SAP, we did have a major problem with property tax revenue pushing through the system. There was an interface issue that got fixed in December. IT and the controller division did a really good job fixing that. And also, like Alex said a minute ago, they are really clicking along in the controller division and posting 2018 data. So the investment earnings are already posted through third quarter, and they just had to do a reasonable projection for the final quarter in terms of how the money gets split amongst funds. So things are looking quite good. It's a nice place to land for the year. That's all I have.
So I don't mean to be flippant, but so it's good news that we only missed our revenue target by $400,000.
Yeah.
On this big a budget, that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's $700 million.
We'd like to be over, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's
All right. Any questions? Yeah.
Do you have a separate presentation, Lance, or is this your presentation?
That's on the
I was
money.
just
I'm going to
doing
talk about the
revenue.
spend.
Okay, maybe I'll wait till after.
That's on the revenue. So has the main variable been the stock market's craziness, or are we way under on, it's off the tobacco hotel tax that?
Tobacco was close to being on budget. It might be slightly under. Room tax was above projection. The two biggest areas were, it was revenue sharing was under by quite a bit. I'll tell you real fast.
Surprise.
Yeah. Property taxes were $1.9 million positive variance for this year, and the revenue sharing is $1.7 million negative variance. So those almost wash the other out. wash each other out. The biggest single variance that didn't get washed out by something else would be PFD garnishments. And that came in extra strong this year. We were assuming a sort of a normal PFD amount. Our percentage of the take actually was much bigger than historically it has been.
So it wasn't more PFD money, it's we got more of
We got
it.
a bigger
found
share.
it.
Yeah, we got a bigger share. That's been 2 years in a row, but this year was especially strong. And for next year's, the 2019 budget, we did assume a higher PFD amount, not quite as high as what you're reading in the paper, but that's already sort of baked in for 2019. So.
And I would add that the other negative from projections at the beginning of the year was earnings on the cash pool were not what was expected.
Is that stock market in, or is that bonds? Where do we put that?
It's all in fixed income, and when interest rates are going up, the value of your fixed income securities are going down, and so what was projected to be a $2 million positive number is a number that's probably close to zero over the whole year.
Are rental tax increases, bed tax increases, a leader for the next? The assessor told us, hey, our valuation, which is based on income for our hotels, was down before because the rentals were down. If we see that going up, is that likely to lead to an increased valuation in those hotels in the next year?
Yeah, it should.
That's good news. Any other questions? Thank you. So that was what money we got in. It's good news that we only are down $400,000. How are we spending it?
We're doing very good. Preliminarily, as of earlier today, when I look at 2018 on the direct cost budget of the spend for all departments, we're at about 95%. I don't think that the last 2 weeks are going to move the needle 5%, but I think we're going to be very, very close at the end. One of the reasons that we have a bit of a gap is that we appropriated some money to Alex's shop to help with the expenses for the ML&P sale. He hasn't used all of those resources, that 7.9, so that's still available on the books as we close 18, but we will be looking to use some of those resources probably in 19. But overall, departments have done a very good job. Police and fire are going to be very, very close.
No big overtime surprises?
Right now, no. I think the fire department is going to be within tens of thousands of dollars. I've been meeting with the chief and their staff, so out of a $98 million budget, they're going to be close.
So I have two questions. First, just because of what you just said, does that sort of separate out the additional costs that are associated with the earthquake in some way?
Yeah, so to Mr. Dunbar's point, some of these expenses may still include the earthquake costs, and so until they move all of those things out,
So
this number is going to continue to.
I mean, if we're not over, even including the earthquake overtime, then we are quite.
It could be, but they also to recognize that any expenses that they had in December, and they're just receiving their invoices in January, they haven't paid those
That's
yet,
fair.
so they need to make sure that those are in as well. So right now we're in, as far as our spend is concerned, we're in pretty good shape. Our labor pretty much is right on overall. Our non-labor is where we're underspending, is what it looks like in 18.
So my main question is this: last year, we were incapable within the first quarter budget revision because we didn't know how much money we had. I know those things aren't directly tied to the CAFR, but it sort of felt all jumbled together, also largely because of SAP.
Correct.
Come April, do you think we will know how much fund balance we have sufficient where we can, if we have anything extra, perhaps do a first quarter budget revision?
So right now I'm cautiously optimistic for two reasons. One, as Mr. Slifka mentioned, one of the things we need to do is we need to close the year. We need to close 2018, and it took us a lot longer to do that for 17. As he mentioned earlier, the third quarter, they've closed 2018 up to the third quarter. They should have basically preliminary numbers for the close of 18 by February. And then we'll spend some time verifying and truing that up. Our calendar to the administration and to the CFO's office is that we need a fund balance number by March. And that helps us get a sense of how much we can and can't do. So the earlier that they can do that. Yeah, so we're going to close our spend in the next 3 weeks as they're closing their months. That will true up how 18 turns out.
Mr. Peterson and then Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I recall, in year-end situations in the past, we've been surprised by people cashing in some of their leave. Are we projecting any of that?
So the Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, typically the surprise is in fire, because when they cash and leave, it's millions of dollars. And right now, the projection that I have includes all of the known cashable leave and the projected cashable leave they had, because they had to do it up by the end of the year, so it does include that. The other departments that they cash and leave, they're not big enough to swing the numbers.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Constable.
Thanks. So, following on what Mr. Dunbar said, what I heard you say is that we close the books. For the last quarter, we have the books in on November. We're still looking at December, it's the last month. But in December was when we really did accrue all the costs of the earthquake. And so, is it within the realm of possibility that we do see an order of magnitude spike that you weren't?
Through the chair, it's too early to tell. And the reason I want to, I think the good news is that I think we're going to be in a positive situation. The departments basically have 3 weeks to, or actually they have less than that, they have 10 days to move all those earthquake expenses out, because when they move those expenses out of the 18 budget, and when Alex's team gets to closing December, they should have 2 things known. They should have all of those expenses out, and they should have all of the December's non-earthquake expenses accounted for. Both of those things have to occur before we actually know how 18 is going to happen.
And so assume then that we are rejected in Washington and we have this big pool of expenses that aren't covered, $500,000 plus whatever we find comes up out of the month of December.
Right.
What do we anticipate we're going to do with that?
I'll let Alex
So,
start.
no matter what happens in Washington, the municipality will be covered. The state covers public assistance. It's the individuals who are at risk if nothing happens in Washington, D.C. for their extra $17,000 beyond what the state has.
So what I'm hearing you say is we're assured payment of these extraordinary costs that are being kind of pulled outside of the regular operation that's going to be reported.
I would say the total cost, I think the number I've seen across the whole state is something that approximates $60 million. I believe 60 million. So I think we had 30 million and everybody else had something more. The state only has 16 million in that reserve account, so they will have to have legislative action in order to fund that so that it gets paid. I would assume that would happen, but you don't ever know.
Good for you.
Okay, so then last fall on that, then let's assume that Juneau doesn't manage to appropriate, and they decide Anchorage can stand on its own 2 feet. Do we have a plan for covering our costs? Then is it just goes back to the general fund and just back to us having to figure out where to cut?
Well, I think what Lance illustrated was of the 30 million that we think we've identified, 10 million is in solid waste, 10 million is in AWU, and the other 10 million is spread across. Those are 2 utilities. They can certainly raise their rates to recapture.
That's helpful. Thanks a lot.
Any other questions on the budget expenditures for 17, 18, and 19?
Maybe for Mr.
Yeah.
19
Yeah.
real quick.
19.
So right now, the departments, obviously they're working on their 2019 budget, moving things through. We have a calendar prepared, and we will in OMB for the first quarter budget revisions, which we will bring to the Assembly after the election in April. And so we are on task to do that. And, as at your next month meeting, we'll keep you updated on that process. And I think between now and then, both Barbara and Desiree will get a calendar of the first quarter revisions from there all the way to when Dan has to send out the tax bills in May. Get your calendar. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Any member questions for either of these fine gentlemen? Next we have a report from the Budget Advisory Commission. Are they here? Yeah, Nolan, good. You look familiar. As you're coming up, you're having your strategy session on the 25th, right? Friday the 25th?
That's correct, sir, yes.
Do you want? What do you need from us, and what do you want from us on that? Or are you just going to?
Sit down.
Sure. Yeah. He doesn't.
Oh, here.
Right.
I'll guide you. No.
Yeah.
Fred,
Provisionally, we think you'll be all right there. Yeah. So whatever you want to present, but also, is there any? I talked to you. I talked to Jed a little bit about coming by in the morning. I've got things all afternoon, but if there's any way we can be useful, we'd like to be.
Sure. Yes, well, Mr. Chair, we are going to have that meeting, it's next Friday, where we're going to devote most of the day to strategic priorities for the coming year. When I talked to this group in December, right prior to the holidays, I got a number of good suggestions about things that we could work on as the BAC. We're interested in making sure that the priorities of the Assembly are taken well into account with the topics that we choose to dive into for our session for the coming year. So we certainly want to be listening to this group about what some of those priorities are and where our efforts and where our thinking about these policies, might be helpful.
Would it be helpful for those Assembly members that could make it if we had a half-an-hour section where we just talked with you guys about that? I know you've asked for those ideas before. You've gotten some. It tends to get lost, I think, in the shuffle of business. So if we set aside some time to just talk to you about what we'd like to see over the next year and what you guys would like from us. Anyway, I'll be there until about 10:30, and then I have to leave for other things. So if there's any time on your agenda from 9 till 10:30, let us know.
Sure, absolutely. We're meeting right after this with our facilitator to talk about the specifics of the session, and so I think that blocking some time in the morning for you as the Assembly chairperson would be really excellent. And I think if you want to extend that invitation to others in the body, I think that would be fantastic too.
Absolutely. Let us know what time you can carve out in that time frame. And
What was the period?
Sorry, this is Friday the 25th, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m.
they go all the way to the 2. I get conflicted later after about 10:30. But if there's any time in the morning that people could make,
Upstairs?
in Lusac, yeah.
This is in the library, correct? Yeah.
In our big assembly room or in an upstairs room?
One of the two rooms that we typically have dinner in.
Dinner, okay. Good, and I'll send, Barbara, if you could send an email out let Barbara know what time you'd like us and for how long, and then we'll let assembly members know, and if they can make it, they'll do it. And then did you have another presentation or just here to answer questions?
No, I can answer any questions. The last meeting that we had, we went over in detail the school district budget.
Right.
So that was our main action since the last time I presented to this group. So nothing, no further action to report on our side, but certainly happy to take any questions.
We'd like you to find us about $1.5 billion for a capital project we just heard about. Mr. Dunbar.
So I'll be in the yard, so wish you a lot of luck. So did the BAC have a chance to review and or take a position on the school bond and the increase to the school bond they've asked for?
We did not take a position on it, no. I'm trying to remember. I think most of our discussion was on the operating side.
And that came to our attention after their meeting, and we didn't have enough time to get them together.
Right. So no position on it now. Is there an aspect of it that needs more attention?
I think whether or not we should repair Graining Middle School, I don't know, which has been discussed for closure in the past. I'm staying agnostic on it, but I'd like to hear people's thoughts on it. But that's coming up really quickly because we're on now the 29th, so it can be a ballot or not.
Okay, excellent. I'll bring that to the group.
Is that a lot of the $4 million? I thought
I thought it was $2 million for Graining and $2 million for
Another
school.
Yeah.
Mr. Dyson.
On Greening, with the decision had been made to not repair your elementary.
Oh, it has.
Old school, there's some profound problems there, and the people on the school board, and particularly their superintendent, realizes that, we're careful how I say that, but there are places where we access capacity in schools all over the district, and it's always difficult to redraw the boundaries, and parents get upset. But here's on the elementary school, probably the excess capacity will take care of it. Greening, I was there for the inspection and so on. There's no structural damage. It's more than cosmetic, but a number of panels, including ones that were a variation of concrete, came loose from their anchors and could fall on somebody and did fall. But structurally, there was no damage to the foundation or the steel structure there. So it's worth repairing, and it's a relatively new school and so on. But the point I was going to make on your business, you guys have and some really significant brain power. And, you know,
Thank you. We think so. We hope so.
Well, you got me fooled. But I want you guys to take some, once in a while, look at the 30,000 foot level and say, here's a pattern of things that the city does and has done that aren't the best practices, or you know, one of the things that comes up. The critics of the bond say, hey, wait a minute, you guys are loading a whole bunch of operating or maintenance stuff into the bonds. Is that a legitimate thing to do or not? You know, kind of philosophical things, but we want the city to be doing best practices, you know, managing facilities and people, programs, and all those kind of things. So if you guys see things that we need to know, it'd be hugely helpful. And yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Did you have a response? Or-
No, that's something that we'll take that definitely into consideration. I appreciate that perspective.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank Nolan. I served on the DEC before I got elected to this body, and I think it's changed a lot for the better in the last year or two, and sort of talked things into doing this strategic planning session, which has now become this annual thing, and it's just so cool to see how much better the BAC has gotten. It's like more engaged, more communicative with assembly members. I think the brain power comment is true too. It just makes me really happy. So thank you, Lance, and Bill,
Thank you.
help us with that too. And for your leadership.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Yes, we always look forward to being with you.
Thank you for your service. Any other questions for Nolan or the Budget Advisory Commission? Good. We'll get that out. Let us know when would be convenient, if possible in the morning, but it's whatever fits your schedule, and then we'll see what assembly members can make it.
Sure. So we're doing the schedule after this, and I think probably if the morning is what works best for you, we can probably concentrate at the input of this group in the morning. I think
Great.
that's what I meant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Marshall, we never used to look forward to this portion of the agenda, and you've got us guardedly optimistic that this is now an enjoyable portion. Don't disappoint us.
All right. Well, let's see if I can deliver. All right. This is the update. 117. This is a good. This is the org chart I presented originally, and all the blue squares were people we didn't have, and here we are. We've got lots of hires completed now, people on staff. We were interviewing on 2 different positions actively and just reposted another position. So we're super close to having our full team. So I think this is really great progress, and we're working on goals on trying to do a lot of the getting the information from the consultants to our permanent workers, and then we're also trying to relieve the workload on the subject matter experts that we've heard a lot of complaint that they still, they want to just do their regular job and not have to do the SAP extra work. So that's the goal. So it's looking good. Training and reports, that's really a big focus for this year. So right now, because we have a training person on staff, we're currently compiling and locating all training materials. So there's a lot
of... This isn't just the SAP provided training materials getting more in place. This is a lot of customization, and way departments have said this is how this works for us?
Well, it's kind of interesting how SAP does their training materials, which means they don't give you training materials.
Oh, okay.
That's the maybe they would call it a feature, but it's a frustrating part. So we've had to do our own training materials, and they originally, part of the original project that went live, they had things called U-Performs, which are like short videos on how to do something. It's like watching someone on a screen click. And that is a system feature, but we still had to build them out. So we have some of those. But what happened was a lot of people just ended up writing cheat sheets, and then they would share them. Like, this is how I did it, and then they would share them out. So what we want to do is make sure we're collecting those and making sure that they're organized and can be shared with everybody. It's been kind of a big, it really has just been like who you know. and we're trying to centralize it and make sure that we get all that information out. Once we get it collected, then we can figure out how we better package it. But short term is to get
So really, I mean, SAP sees that as like we're so simple that we don't need it, or why is that a feature?
I've done other ERP systems, and their answer is, well, it's so customizable. Then why would we develop online help? Because there are so many features you turn on and off that even if we did write up something, it's never going to guarantee it's going to support what the users experience. I don't know if I agree with that methodology, but that's their stick. That's what they say.
Like, why would we write up a user manual when we could charge it $300 an hour to come show you?
I would say that's the extra thing.
That was such a
Exactly.
good comment. Everyone needs to speak up for the recording.
It is kind of their business model in that industry for sure. Why write up something when I can come out and charge you this much money to do it? Yes, that's great. The other thing we're going to do is make sure we're starting to host workshops. We want to make sure we're sharing the knowledge, helping people talk to each other, and then start on the creating new training materials. Like, this is definitely a gap. Everyone's guessing on how to do X, Y, Z. Let's make that happen. And what's the best way to do that? So we're getting all that kind of organized and starting to deliver it.
Mainly in the form of videos, or mainly in the form of a book?
I think more in a video, because what you can do there'll be written materials, but also in a video, they'll track what you're doing, online, and people could watch that while they're trying to do their work. A little more interactive. The other one is reports and more reports. That was also a big challenge. When I walked in the door, everyone said there were no reports, and then there were some reports delivered, and then there were some standard reports that somehow got released, and then nobody had access to them. Why? I have no idea, other than somebody selected that way when they went live. And so right now we're just we don't have a report person on staff, but we are trying to get our arms around it. The goal is to make all available standard reports, get them out there. And this is an interesting fun fact, is that there's an SAP at their corporate level. They have all these, they call them standard reports. But if you ask them, what is the list of your standard reports? No one answers your question. And you're like, this is weird. They'll answer some other. You're like, that's not the question I answered or asked. That's a weird answer. And then what we learned is we could ask the almighty Google, find me. And we came up with over 16,000 standard reports. And then what happens is you have to actually turn them on and then give people access. So what we learned is we turned them on, but we never gave anybody access. I don't know why we did that. We're fixing that.
Good.
It's just lots of things going on, I guess. So then also create new reports. We want to make sure all the CAFR reports are all tuned up and working. And then we want to make sure we're training everybody how to use the reports. So we're back to training again. So it's kind of when you look at the 80-20 rule, like 80% of your problems are caused by 20%. So that's the goal of training and reports. And then as we move forward, we're in the break, fix, and stabilization is a priority. So change release process, we're still going to be doing changes on a monthly release cycle. But then we're also saying any payroll fixes, we are going to fast track them. They are not going to be part of the standard monthly process. Any payroll problem we find from this point forward, we'll start it a week or two ago, is we're going to fast track them and treat them like emergencies and crank them out. And our goal is we'd like to have all payroll fixes done by March 31st. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And I would love to hit that target. And then also, just so that you understand, that some fixes are still dependent on the results of the bargaining agreements. They still have to come to an agreement on some of those things. Enhancements are going to be evaluated. So people still wouldn't it be great if it was blue instead of green? Or wouldn't this be awesome to have this new feature turned on? We're going to make sure we get those evaluated. By what we have is we have a group, the SAP Executive Committee, and that's been around, I think, before it went live. And the committee members are the mayor, chief of staff, deputy chief of staff, the C-suite is probably a good way to say that. The goal is that people want new features, then they're going to have to pitch them to that committee, and that committee's going to have to approve them. So I call it the Shark. I say Bill, I think, called it the Shark Tank. But we are trying to make sure that just because one department wants it and this department wants that, how are we going to decide? And we want to make sure we have more of a non-biased judging panel. And that's it. That's all I got.
Nice. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yes, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question on
Sure.
the enhancements. Would the new team that you've assembled be able to do some of those in-house? or
That's the
would-
goal. Yeah.
That's the goal? Wow.
Yeah.
All of
That
them
would be
in-house?
nice. It depends on what they are. Sure. Yeah. But it would be nice if we can start taking that. Or if nothing else, if we hire someone to do it, we sit with them and we learn how they're doing it. And we really would love to be less dependent on consultants. So.
Who else?
Uh-huh.
My only question, sir, is if we can begin the process of kind of rubbing the sharp edges off of future expenditures for us as soon as you can. Like if you're projecting out over next year, we're going to have to do a number of enterprise level efforts that are going to cost outside of what we call normal operational costs. The sooner you can start kind of buffering that information into us, the less shocking it will be and the less resistance we'll have.
Okay. I promise. Yeah. I would, as soon as I hear it. My goal has been to the team, this is not the year we're going to go ask for more money.
Right.
This is the year to show and prove and,
Right,
and fix and
way.
stabilize. And I don't have the appetite. So I don't think the public does either. So I
Works out
don't.
well.
Yeah.
Further questions?
Nope.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Mr. Falsey, we used to look forward to your presentation. It was fun, and then for a while it was kind of a drag. What you got?
I always look forward to all these presentations.
All right, these are the short versions now.
You have stuff to put up on the...
Yeah.
Mr.
Senator Farsley. Just so you know, Senator Farsley is also the greatest legal mind of his generation. I don't know if you remembered that one.
Are you referring to yourself?
No, it's a character that Ron Oliva invented.
I know. I called him Senator earlier.
Okay, so we have done this numerous times. There was a request to get back to the old pie chart. So the theme of this one is we are through the delay, back off high center, making progress. The way we look at that is the paper pay corrections that are coming in. We had a little bit more of an uptick that I believe is related to all of the earthquake shenanigans that happened and to end of the year items, but the uptick puts us back at the level that was the more stabilized level and at the level that we can actually sort of deal with. So when we have a normal operation period, again, that is neither end of the year nor earthquake, I'm hopeful that we will be back down at the 118, 122 or less, because our ultimate goal is to get back to at least how we were in the PeopleSoft era. But that's the current state of the incoming pay corrections. And then we wanted this chart again. So we had been sort of stalled out at 71% done on the backlog because we were doing the HR support pack process and into the year closures. We finally got through that, so now we're moving forward. The defects, the ones that are trapped in the need a defect to get fixed, or we need to verify that they were actually already fixed by defect correction, are down. The ones that are still being reviewed are down. The number that we have completed are up. We are processing many more than we used to be able to process in a month, and we're at 75%. I have also told payroll and ER I want the plan that gets us done so we don't have to do this anymore, and that aligns well with Susie Marshall's goal of getting all the defect corrections done by March. So we're moving forward again, and I'm hopeful that we will continue to see progress as we do this. Next one.
Questions?
Yeah, I have to go back there. So we got, increased 4% that we completed from December to January. Are there reasons to think or not think that it's going to be linear, that there'll be 79% the month after, or 80% month after that?
I don't know. I know that when we were way back at 35% or whatever, we had a huge jump to 60, and that was because we finally pushed through our 2, 3, and 4, and that blew out the bulk of the things that were hung up by the in-defect production. I don't know if there is, as we chew through the remaining reprogramming corrections, I'm sure it's not linear. I'm sure it's not like every one of the outstanding defects affects the same number of pay corrections, but I don't know how dramatically it will improve when we do the one that affects the most, and then the second most, and then the third most. I think we're going to be making incremental progress, and I know that as we get closer to being really done, the goal line stand is going to be a slow, hard push, because we'll be down to the bus drivers, for instance, who are probably more challenging than anybody from the very beginning. So,
I guess, yeah, I wanted to ask that too. We can sort of call it declining marginal improvements, because the last defects are actually more difficult defects.
some of them are actually more difficult defects, and then some of them are just the onesie-twosies. Like this scenario is a black swan. It's incredibly rare, but it did affect this one individual, and now we're fixing that.
Yeah.
Is there, what's the grievance or outstanding negotiations with the union situation? Have you resolved, or are you still in discussions over either 18 or 19 defects?
It depends on the unions. Some of the unions we have made very good progress with. Some of the unions we have resolved things with. Some of the unions we hope that we are close to resolving things with. I don't have that currently in front of me, but we can give you the update.
I think next time when we do this, not every time, but maybe next time, if you can give us an update on that, just so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
On that topic,
Mr. Constable.
what I have heard is that at this time, the unions, several of them are struggling internally with their membership to kind of come to grips with the realities and what can be done. And so there are some elements of that that are outside of the control of the administration. Until they have had a conversation with themselves and come to a point, it's pretty hard for us to take that next step.
And they're right.
A lot of them are going through their negotiations now.
Yep.
Are we done with Senator Farsley? Thank you, sir. And we rushed through it. I thought we weren't going to have enough time, then I thought maybe we'd have extra, but we hit right on. When we have time, is there any member of the public who'd like to say anything at all? Would you, sir? Mr. Haberman, go. I got my timer.
Carl Haberman, represent myself, I follow the public process is done correctly. Decision made by the governing body is more like public interest. I live in the family. These reports that were presented today, they were available if you were physically here to see on the screen, but the public didn't look at the hard copies, and again, the public is not able to see an agenda unless you come to the meeting and see it here. And that's not the way we do it for the public, in all fairness. And I really strongly encourage you to move these meetings over to a set, whether a video, audio, and even when you do have appropriate time to connect with the people, at least they have the advantage of hearing what's being said in these rooms. Because I can't stress this, as you know, I attend a lot of meetings, okay, and a lot of assembly meetings. And the thing is, what I see coming out of these meetings you're having off site over there is there's a lot of information, and it would be a great benefit for you to have that transparent to the public, and in such a way it will help your job explaining what you do, and for them to express their comments to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Any other member of the public? Do not see any in this meeting.